Curious about what makes a serger tick? In this video, I'll break down the key parts of a serger, from the loopers to the blade and how they work together to create clean seams. We'll focus on overlock sergers or overlock portion of combination sergers that have 2 needles and 2 loopers. Hi Sewing Bees, I'm Sookie, the author of The Pocket Guide to Sergers, and for over 25 years I've been teaching sewists in person around the world, and now I'm bringing that education directly into your sewing room. Before we get started, I want you to grab your serger's manual. Now, if you're like me and can't find your manual, don't worry. Most brands have a PDF version available on their website that you can print out, which is exactly what I did. Once you've got everything ready, meet me at the machine. Let's start at the top with the thread stand. Just like on a sewing machine, this stand will keep your threads upright, ensuring the thread feeds smoothly into the machine. There will be 1 spool pin per possible thread placement, and proper thread placement is key to keeping everything running smoothly, especially for sergers with automatic tensions. So if the manual tells you to place the spool on a particular pin and it seems really strange, just go with it. I promise it's right. Now let's move down to the tensions. First, you got to figure out whether your serger has manual, automatic, or computerized tensions. Here's how to tell. Manual tension sergers will have dials or rollers on the front or top. You'll adjust the tensions manually with your fingers. The bigger the number, the tighter the tension. The smaller the number, the looser the tension. Automatic tension sergers will have some sort of a lever or dial with letter options like A, B, C, and D. Those letters set the tensions automatically. And then there are computerized sergers, which sort of combine both systems. So based on the stitch you choose, the tension will automatically adjust. However, most models like this also still give you the freedom to adjust manually, which I personally think is really cool. Now let's jump over to needles. The number of needles will depend on the type of machine you have. For an overlock only serger, there will only be 2 needles, the left and the right. For a combination serger that does both overlock and cover stitch, there can be up to 5 needles. In this case, the 2 needles to the far right will be the overlock needles. Check your manual to see what needle types your serger takes. Now, most sergers can take universal needles, like an 80-12 or a 90-14. And remember, the bigger the number, the bigger the needle. If you're sewing with specialty fabric, you might want to get a specialty needle. So for example, if you're working on knits, you might want to get a jersey needle. Or if you're working on like a really fine fabric or microfiber fabrics, you might want to grab some Microtex needles. And lastly, there are serger-specific needles, like the ELX 705. It comes in both 80-12 and 90-14. These are designed for high-speed serging and have a long groove on both the front and the back. And they're designed to go through smoothly and reduce skip stitches. And that's what I keep in my sergers most of the time. Now here's the thing that's super important to know, so write this down. You can use most sewing machine needles in your serger, but you should never use your serger needles in your sewing machine. Those ELX 705, they can actually damage your sewing machine, and it's because of that extra groove. Hey, by the way, if you want to start making notes, grab a copy of my Hello Serger mini handbook. It's a free download with some great serger basics and note pages to keep track of your favorite stitches. You can find it in the link in the description. While we're near the needles, let's take a minute to talk about the presser foot. On a serger, just like on a sewing machine, the presser foot holds your fabric steady while you stitch. Every serger comes with a standard foot, and many makes and models offer a really nice variety of specialty feet. And some of these presser feet are even game changers, but that's another topic for another video. Here's the thing, unlike sewing machines, serger feet usually are not interchangeable between brands. In fact, they're not even interchangeable between models from the same brand. For example, my 2 sergers require completely different feet. So if you're thinking about picking up a specialty foot, double check that it is compatible with your machine. And here's a tip. Keep an eye out for sales because in my experience, Those presser feet can get a little pricey. While we're on the topic of presser feet, let's talk about the presser foot lever. This is the part that raises and lowers the presser foot. And when the foot is down, it holds your fabric in place for stitching. Depending on your serger's make and model, the presser foot lever might be in different spots. So it's worth getting familiar where it's located on your serger. Now, this may seem like a small detail, but what we're going to cover is pretty important. When you're threading your serger, always raise the foot. This disengages the tensions, making it easier for the thread to slide into place. And when you're ready to sew, always lower the foot to engage the tensions and keep the fabric secure. Think of your presser foot like a doorway. Raising the foot opens the door, allowing the thread into the machine, while lowering it closes the door, locking everything in place for stitching. Oh, and if your serger has a knee lift, you can raise the presser foot for a hands-free operation, which is super handy when working on larger or trickier projects. Make sense? Great. On to the next. Now, not all sergers have this next feature, but I'm still going to show it to you because if you're ever in the market for a new serger, it's something you might want to consider. It's the pressure control. And if you've used it before, you know how handy it can be. It adjusts how much pressure the presser foot puts on your fabric, which can make a huge difference when working with trickier materials. For example, if you've got a super slippery fabric that likes to move around while you're serging, you would increase the pressure. Think of it like this. It's the difference between an elephant and a bird sitting on a rug. If you tried to pull the rug out from underneath the bird, no problem. It's light. It barely is holding it down. But try pulling it out from under the elephant. It's not going anywhere. That extra pressure keeps slippery fabrics firmly in place, making your serging much easier. Now on to the front of your serger, but before we open the door, let's talk about the trim bin. It's sort of like your little serger's trash can, I guess you could say. It catches all the scraps the blade trims off so that they don't end up everywhere. But not every serger comes with one. If yours doesn't, no biggie. Grab a paper bag and tape it to the front of your serger table, or you can splurge on an aftermarket trim bin if you're feeling fancy. And hey, maybe one of our first projects will be making a custom trim bin. Let me know what you think in the comments. Because the floor really isn't exactly the best place for you to store all of your scraps. But keeping those extra scraps under control will make serging so much easier and just a lot more tidy. Now let's open the front door of the serger in order to talk about the loopers. Before we talk about the loopers though, I want to show you the tools that came with my machine. Most machines will come with some basic tools. Mine just happened to live inside the front door, which is really nice because then I know where they're at all times. But check your manual to keep these tools close by when you are using your serger. In here, I've got my Allen wrench so that I can tighten and loosen my needle screws, a lint brush with also a stiletto combo, precision angled tweezers, which are amazing for threading, the upper looper converter, this allows us to create flat lock stitches, and the needle threader / needle holder. So check which tools you've got and let me know in the comments if you've got any extras. Maybe I need to get some. I'm always fascinated by what is included with the purchase of a serger. Okay, sewing bees, it's officially time to dive into loopers. Overlock sergers, which is what we're talking about today, have two loopers, the upper looper and the lower looper. The upper looper lays the thread on the top side of the fabric, while the lower looper lays the thread on the underside. The loopers move side to side, while the needles move up and down, locking the looper threads together to create that secured, balanced overlock stitch. All right, let's dive into a topic that can be a bit tricky to understand on sergers, and that is width. But don't worry, I am here to break it down and make it super simple. Width on a serger is very different from width on a sewing machine. I want you to think about this for a minute. So close your eyes and tell me, when you're sewing a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine, what does the needle do? That's right, it moves from side to side. Now, even if you're brand new to using a serger, I want you to think about what the needles or your needle does on a serger. That's right, they go straight. Sergers sew straight, really, really good. So then if the needles aren't moving, what controls the width? Well, sewing bees, there are actually 3 things involved in controlling the width on a serger. Please don't let that overwhelm you. In fact, you don't even ever have to think about it ever again. But I want you to understand how it all works. Your manual is actually going to tell you what to set up when you choose a stitch. But as your serger coach, I just really want you to have a true understanding of what goes into making the width happen. So it's a combination of the needles, the blade, and the stitch fingers. Let's start with the stitch fingers. The stitch fingers are small metal prongs that live under the presser foot and that they help form and stabilize the stitch. It's so fascinating. They actually guide the thread as it wraps around the edge of the fabric. For example, when you're creating a very narrow stitch, like a rolled hem, you would disengage or remove one of the stitch fingers so that the fabric can roll tightly. Now, some sergers make it a little more complicated, so you actually have to physically remove the throat plate to do this. Next is the blade, which trims the fabric as you sew. Some people call it the knife. The position of the blade determines how much fabric is getting cut away. Moving the blade closer to the needles creates a more narrow stitch, while moving it further away from the needles will result in a wider stitch. And finally, width is also measured by the distance from the furthest needle to the blade. For example, if your serger has 2 needles and you're using both, or just the left one, the stitch will be wider because the distance from the left needle to the blade is greater. If you're only using the right needle, the distance to the blade is shorter, resulting in a more narrow stitch. Hopefully that explains how width on a serger works. And like I mentioned at the beginning of this section, knowing this is helpful, but you always are going to want to refer to your manual for the settings. And if you've never heard this, let me know in the comments. Now on to length. Stitch length on a serger controls the distance between each stitch, just like on a sewing machine. So adjusting the stitch length is pretty straightforward. Just turn the dial similar to your sewing machine. The bigger the number, the longer the distance between the stitches. The smaller the number, the closer together they are. Feed dogs and differential feed. Feed dogs are those little teeth that live under the presser foot that move your fabric as you stitch, just like on a sewing machine. If your serger has differential feed, you'll see an extra knob or lever somewhere on your serger with settings from anywhere between 0.7 and 2.0. This controls the distance between the front and the back feed dogs. The back feed dogs stay in place, while the front feed dogs move closer or further away from the back feed dogs, which are going to prevent waviness or puckering. So differential feed keeps fabric smooth and even, and it makes it a lifesaver for tricky fabrics like knits or shears. Now, not all sergers have differential feed, but if you are ever in the market for a new serger, I did make a short video explaining the top things to consider when buying one. So you can check out that video right here. And until I see you next time, I hope you have a creative day. Bye-bye.